smoke is quieting down. Seems like we've got to a lot of the smoke. Dub, you got smoke?
So, Melyssa Ford is starting a new podcast. Initially, we thought the name was going to be The Menopod, but Melyssa has recently switched it up to Hot and Bothered. Now, I'm not entirely sure why she decided to make this change, but there's speculation it's because the feedback she's been getting on Twitter and from other content creators who've done think pieces on her new project. But here's where things get interesting. It seems like there's some tension brewing between Melyssa Ford and Mandi from Full Court Pumps. From the outside, it's looking like Mandi is paying a little too much attention to whatever Melyssa has going on. Melyssa even took this to the Joe Budden podcast to address, seemingly telling people like Mandi and others not to be jealous of her involvement on the show. Mandi didn't hold back though. She took to Twitter making some bold statements saying, "I don't want to be the sixth mic on anybody's podcast." Ouch. Damn, Mandi. She even took a subtle dig at Melyssa's weight and threw light remarks about owning her own studio. Mandi basically always had something to say about Melyssa Ford, and none of it seems particularly positive. Fast forward to today, Melyssa announced the premiere date for Hot and Bothered, which is November 1st, right, 2024, with some new posts on her social media platforms. But of course, Mandi couldn't resist adding her 2 cents. Look at the files. So here is the post that Melyssa Ford made. 11/1 premieres Hot and Bothered. You see her. But Mandi tweeted, "Podcast tip. Search to see if the name is already taken and how active the feed is. You don't want to name your podcast the same as multiple other shows with the same name." Now, this didn't go unnoticed. Joe Budden himself stepped into the conversation replying, "You still being shady? You ain't learned yet?" Shaking my head. Mandi wasn't fazed and shot back, "Well, that's just a graphic. Doesn't look like the DSP is created, so yes, it would be beneficial to her to include with Melyssa Ford for distinction. With this announcement, she should have also already had her feed set up to send you all to subscribe. There are missteps, that's all. I want her to win." And Joe, in true to form, clapped back with, "Or you can just get off her Disney." Classic Joe, right? Now, a lot of people flocked to Mandi's comments accusing her of hating on Melyssa and trying to downplay her new podcast. People felt Mandi shouldn't be giving advice in such a shady way, especially with how she started the tweet with "podcast tip," right? Isn't that a little condescending? But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Why can't Mandi critique Melyssa's new work? Is it because she's also a podcaster or because she was once affiliated with the Joe Budden podcast? Starting a post with "podcast tip" already sets the tone, especially given their history. And look, Mandi does have a point. There are indeed several podcasts out there with the name Hot and Bothered. So I understand her wanting Melyssa to come up with something more original. Personally, I was a fan of the name The Menopod. I thought it was clever, but I guess, it didn't sit well with Melyssa. Maybe the feedback she was getting was a bit too much. But here's the real question. Do you think Mandi is doing too much? Since Melyssa has been on the Joe Budden podcast, Mandi has been one of her harshest critics. At this point, it's starting to feel like there's a little bit of an obsession. Melyssa even had to address Mandi and other women last month because their constant critiques were becoming a hot topic in the podcast community. Now, some people are taking Mandi's side, and I get it. In the podcast world, there's definitely a process to how you roll things out. People are upset that they can't subscribe to Melyssa's podcast on any platforms yet. They expected a more polished rollout. Even Joe and Imani had a whole jingle for the Menopod. I just hope Melyssa explains why she changed the name and addresses all the noise around it. What do y'all think? Is Mandi giving genuine advice, or is she just being shady? And do you think that Joe Budden should have sat this one out and let Melyssa Ford handle her own battles? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. You feel me? I know Joe Budden was just on Twitter Spaces and he said that, Mandi don't want no smoke with him. But he didn't really say too much because he knew people were listening and somebody could probably clip it up. But listen, we'll be back with the files.
What'd you say?
What are your thoughts on Amanda? Like, do you have anything to say?
A girl there is taping the room.
You.
My God, Dub too. That's my man though.
Gang gang.
That's my man, Big Dub.